Did you know something new is invented every 10 minutes? Join us as we speak to the innovators reinventing our world here on planet Earth and far, far beyond. Welcome to GTWN Now, a podcast brought to you by the Global Telecom Women's Network and sponsored by CMS Global. GTWN Now introduces the movers and the makers at the cutting edge of technology who are committed to keeping us all connected. In each episode, we invite a leading expert to share her experience building life-changing inventions in places and spaces that don't yet exist, and the inspiration they must muster to tackle the impossible. We also ask our guests to share tips, tools, and strategies to reach your own moonshot. I'm your host, Rosali Gitao, founder of Bixi FinTech for Women and Global Telecom Women's Network International Board member. Welcome to GTWN Now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the GTWN Now podcast. I'm Leticia Latino-van Splunteren, International Board Member of the Global Telecom Women's Network, and I'm honored to be your host for today's episode. Our topic focuses on a challenge that affects every citizen, not just technologies: how trust is being tested in a world where voices and images can be convincingly generated by machines, and what role telecom operators can play in helping people stay protected. This is not a future issue. It's already happening, and it's reshaping how we think about communication, responsibility, and trust at scale. I'm very excited to have an amazing guest for you today. She's Terri Borras, a nationally recognized leader in cybersecurity, national security, and emerging technology risk. Over a distinguished career spanning government, defense, and the private sector, she has advised senior leaders on how technological change impacts people, institutions, and critical infrastructure. Terri brings a rare ability to translate complex security challenges into human and societal implications, making her a powerful voice in conversations about trust, resilience, and leadership in the digital age. I have personally met Terri, so I'm very, very happy to welcome you to our podcast today.
Thank you, Leticia. I'm really glad to be here today and really excited for this conversation we're getting ready to have.
Well, I'm excited too because I will say I was in Miami attending a session on synthetic content, which I kind of knew the basics, and I was blown away by the stats, Terri, that you shared there. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do want to start this episode with that story you shared about how many seconds does it take for somebody to clone your voice. That really hit home for me. And that's one of the reasons that I decided to invite you to co-author an article for the Mobile Century magazine that's out during Mobile World Congress 26, titled The Trust Gap in a Synthetic World, Why Telecom Carriers Can No Longer Sit This One Out. So can you share that? I'm pretty sure you know which episode, which fact I'm talking about.
Well, absolutely. You know, what strikes people isn't the technology so much as the realization of how little input it takes to make something completely new and, albeit a bit scary. 3 seconds of audio, that's all it takes. A voicemail greeting, a social media clip, all of that is enough for the system to produce a voice that sounds very convincingly like you. And once people understand that, the conversation starts to immediately shift from, that's interesting, to, oh my God, this changes everything. And so when we talk about the rapid influx of technology today and everything that we're able to accomplish in that technology, what we've seen is a change in how we look at trust and a change at the tools that enable trust for us in, we'll say, in this century, since we're getting ready to write that article.
That's very very interesting, and yes, we know these things are happening, but I think we are not used to, deceit in the way that technologies enable it, and I guess scale is what makes it the most scary. So I would love. I mean, we probably have a lot of technologists and telecom people in this podcast, but I would love for you to put it in simple terms, in terms of we're hearing words like deep fake and synthetic voice. And how do you explain, like a regular person, somebody that's not exposed to technology at all, what this all mean? Because I fear that sometimes people say, oh yeah, well, I'm not a big shot, I cannot, there's nothing that can happen to me, like they feel detached from the threat.
Sure. At the most basic level, we've basically taught machines to imitate humans, not just in words, but in tone, emotion, pacing, context. So a synthetic voice is not a recording of you. And that's what most people miss. A synthetic voice is a model that has learned how you sound and can generate new speech that you never actually said. So what's different now is the realism. These systems, they don't sound robotic. The old, hi, I am so and so. Those systems are gone. They're history today. What we see is an image that sounds incredibly familiar, and familiarity is what lowers our guard.
It's it's powerful, and I know, especially when you are from places that are not the safest places in the world, and I'm from Venezuela, which of course we've been in the news for for a reason. But these things happen. Like somebody can get kidnapped, and people, end up paying huge amounts of money. Of course, you want the safety of your loved one, but you have nothing protecting you. Like there's nothing out there that it's obvious where I say I can uh, hang up this call and be at peace with the fact that I just didn't create a bigger problem for me and my family. How do you think the advances are out there? And I know you advise companies, and I know you're working heavily with one that is developing software that can be at our fingertips, at the fingertips of any citizen to be protective. How do you see these advances in what's happening right now and how we can get protected?
Well, I think to backtrack a little bit, this isn't just about fake content online. We've all heard of the scams that usually occur during the holiday season, where voices of a loved one are used to, in most cases, scam the elderly out of life savings. But this shows up not just in phone calls, video meetings, voice messages, Zoom, places where people are used to trusting what they hear. That's where we've seen the shift. And so when trust becomes something that we place in people, which is what we do today, to now it's something that we place in systems. And so the problem is most of those systems, they were never designed to verify authenticity at scale. People ask, is trust more fragile because of technology? I'd argue something slightly different. Trust feels fragile because we assumed authenticity without building the verification in the system. And so I'm talking to you, you're talking to me, I know how you sound, you know how I sound. We place immediate trust in that conversation because we have relied on auditory systems to tell us, oh, that's Leticia, I can tell her anything. But the systems today have elevated that with the realism of their content. I could be having an entire conversation with you and it was never you. But there's
Mm.
nothing in the system or the infrastructure or the architecture that forces me to pause. Nothing in there says, um, is this actually Leticia? And
Mm.
so if you don't have that in the system, what you're left with is you're dealing with an impersonated voice, but you don't have the infrastructure to understand that it is. So the four things that make this fundamentally different. I would say speed, because that's how humans communicate. We communicate at speed. I'm going to call you, we're going to chat, and we're going to finish the call.
Mhm.
The other part is scale. When you can synthetically utilize voices, you now have multiple individuals that may be involved in a conversation. And we saw that recently in the financial sector, where an entire Zoom call was fabricated, and the poor
Mm.
analyst who listened and who followed instructions based on that Zoom call by members of their executive suite, they did everything right. They didn't take that
Mm.
first phone call at face value. They asked to see visual verification. They showed them visual verification. And so the analyst took an action that cost the company millions of dollars. But when we backtrack through that, that analyst did everything right. And yet the scale with which the scam was perpetrated, coupled with the realism and the emotional manipulation. You have to do this now. The company will lose money if you don't do it. Do your job.
Mhm.
The analysts did what they were supposed to do. So you can now impersonate someone instantly, repeatedly, convincingly, all the while targeting their relationship and stress points. That combination simply did not exist before. And so, as we look at that environment today, the company that I work with, Incognito, what we look at is there a way for us to enable that infrastructure to give not just the individual, but companies and boards the opportunity to take a step, take a moment, reduce the stress points, reduce the emotional manipulation, slow down the speed, and now scale doesn't even apply, because you've removed the three things that enable the scale of that environment. And so you get to take a step back and go, is this real? Is this not? Should I do another check? And that is what's enabling us to really help the environment tackle this new threat.
That's powerful. And I have to be grateful to you. And I know people that you work with, you all come from the national defense world, from like really keeping people, like where you have served to keep people safe. And so now it's a whole different mission, but it's the same at the same. You have to keep people protected. And one of the things why this subject became very interesting to me is because I've spent the last 3 decades, pretty much of my professional life, building physical infrastructure, building the towers, building the networks, taking the message of connectivity for all and connect the unconnected. And then you start realizing that this very critical infrastructure we have taken years to build with the best mission, which is connect people. Now it's being taken advantage by bad actors using the same, like let's call it pipelines, or they're not airwaves, and to deceive and scam. And so it's almost like a big hit at the core. It's now you're communicating, but you're communicating falsity and you're communicating deception. And so I really became very passionate about it. And this is how this article we co-wrote together came about. And thinking about how can we breach the walls, like connecting this telecom infrastructure with policy, with AI safety, but also where do the role of telecom operators or infrastructure builders fall in all of this? Because they protect us against, try to protect us by robocalls and spams, and we know they're active there. But in your point of view, how involved should there be? And I know there's a lot of the concern about they probably don't even want to validate what's on the network. But if this is a highway and they have to check if the cars that are there, they have a tag and they're lawful, it's not crazy to think that at the telecom level, at the network level, there should be some safeguards to protect us.
Well, I think historically, telecom fraud focused more on scale. You mentioned robocalls. We all know the spam calls. And there's been, I won't say rampant, but there's been a level of mass abuse to the infrastructure that really fuels all of us. But synthetic attacks, they feel different. They are different. We moved from the noise of robocalls and spam to signal. And when I say signal, I mean targeted, specifically, individually in some cases. And so instead, for the infrastructure, instead of millions of bad calls, hoping that one works, attackers now make a handful of highly credible attempts. And the impact per attempt is much higher. So think about that. Now you can mine the system in order to reduce the pool but gain better advantage. So in that gain better advantage, it's the difference between 10 million phone calls hoping to get $10,000 and 15 phone calls to get $10 million. And so that changes how organizations need to think about detection and response, because you can't just block volume anymore. I mean, you know that better than anyone. You have to now think about nuance. And what is the nuance that telecom can be at the forefront of? And I think it's assessing authenticity. Is the call authentic? Is Terry calling Leticia? And if the telecom industry can give users a high trust factor in that the person I'm calling is the person I'm talking to is the person I called, the actual person and not a made up person, and is the conversation then that we're going to have, does it have the level of privacy that I expected when I made the phone call? So those are the basic things when people pick up a phone. Those are the basic things that we look for to ensure that we can power whatever it is, whether it's a parent calling a child to check on them and their safety, whether it's a financial transaction, whether it is global orders. So as a brigadier general in the United States Army, getting ready to retire, one
You
of the
say that
things
so
that
in passing by, that this is why it's incredible your expertise in this area.
yeah, so one of the things that we look for, that we depend on, and that we have multiple vehicles for is the person that I'm talking to the person I'm supposed to be talking to? And are the orders that I'm receiving via that phone call trusted, actual, factual? And so this new stage of synthetic threats give everyone pause as to, should I believe what I'm currently hearing? And that's a dynamic that we haven't seen in pretty much forever. So as you look at that, you're now forced to, what can we do to defend not just people from it, but to defend the infrastructure and the industry?
Mm. So true. It's a big task, and in what you're saying in terms of how do I trust voice, I also think that we are under attack in terms of information that we consume, and we know this is the era where we scroll. I admit it, like, and I share already that where I'm from, but Instagram becomes almost like your news outlet because that's the fastest. Those short videos telling you what's happening, and then now you become target of fake information, fake videos. You know, this take emotional drainage into like you of the content you consume a day, depending what subject you're consuming. Of course, there's subjects in this case like real-time geopolitical stuff. There's so much out there, and that you get depressed just by looking because you don't know what to believe anymore. And I know this is something that you're also hoping to tackle, which is pinpointing in all these multiple social media platforms that are there also what's true and what's not, because when there were TV channels at least serve a little bit more of a vetting, like if they're going to misinform, it's going to be in nuance, in like it cannot be so straightforward flat out lie. How do you see all that? And also for the youth, because when you're an adult and you've gone a few times around the block, then you can discern a little bit what's true and what's not. But our youth, they don't have that capacity yet.
Yeah. Voice has long been treated as the high confidence channel. Um, and what I get a lot of is, can you still defend that statement? And I say, not without adjustment, because, voice still matters. We hear things before we see things sometimes. In today's information rich environment, they've meshed that, right? The video and the audio is hitting you full stream. And so, what we look at in psychological cues, voice still matters more than the view, because voice has that emotional connection. It's what makes us human. And so, but blind trust no longer works. And I have 5 kids, and so as we talk about the environment and what they see and the critical thinking they must initiate at every opportunity in order to ensure that they understand what they're seeing and what they're hearing, and that they filter that through what they know, how they've been educated, what they understand, their morals, their values, all of those things. They have to then sift through all of that. And so, we've built the workflows for that, whether it's at home, how we teach culture and values, whether it's at work and the infrastructure that we use at work. But the escalation paths of how do you get to, is this real? Is this not? Should I do this? Should I not? You assume right from the beginning that the emotional connection from the voice is that's what means something. That's what starts the interaction. And the synthetic environment, that assumption needs some level of reinforcement to ensure that after they've done all the sifting, after they've done all the critical thinking, after they've instituted an institutional workflow, that they still take the right action based on the first sounds that they heard that started this whole process. That's where I think synthetic voice has become the biggest threat. And so as an industry, taking a step back to say, how can we reinforce the infrastructure to elevate the trust? Now, I'm not going to say we can get to 100%. We can't. No one can. But as we look at that moment where we pause before we start the workflow, before we start to take an action, if in that moment we have reinforced the infrastructure that enables us to make that key decision, then you've now changed the entire dynamic. And so some of it will pass because some people it will pass. But in others, people will take a moment to go, this is my workflow. The system tells me I should be suspect to whether this is real or synthetic. I'm going to now do better due diligence before I take an action. Now, as a board, as a company, you have now shown that you have taken active steps to protect not just the company, the stakeholders, the consumer, the individual. You've done everything humanly possible to try to remove that threat. Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Absolutely. I think that's such a powerful statement. And I definitely believe that this is a much, much needed conversation. So I'm very happy that you're here and to raise the flag to my dear telecommunications industry that we do have a responsibility here, that we do know that our infrastructure it's enabling, unfortunately, or is the main enabler for these things to happen, and protecting the users, because even those in the industry are users, right? We don't only
Yep.
build the structure, but I also use the infrastructure,
Yeah.
and you want to be safe, and this is something I think it's a win-win. Nobody can argue with. We need to look into this, and as we look into this, and as we are bombarded with AI applications and all this other, and governance becomes such a difficult thing. And I've had my feet wet a little bit through my work at the FCC and different committees, and better understanding all that it has to take into, policy making, how involved should be, the legislators, and aware. And just by doing this, we are raising awareness, which is something I'm very passionate about. So where would you say that in this area where regulation will inevitably lead somehow? Where do you see the thing? Is it industry leadership that can shape the outcome before the mandate arrives, which I believe so personally? Or do you think this is going to be something that the regulation is going to have to drive? Where or do you think it's going to be a parallel thing eventually?
Well, I think regulation will come. It always does. The real question is whether industry shapes the standard before the mandate arrives, or if industry reacts afterwards. So the
Hmm.
former, right, when you have control, when you can look through individual subsets of how you've developed infrastructure, and what you hope to achieve, the former, where industry takes the steps forward faster than regulation and policy, you tend to get better outcomes. Policy tends to be the wide swath approach to let's try to protect everybody. And
Hmm.
so it tends to leave out a lot of nuance and information about the responsibility in the position, not necessarily the intent. Because, if your infrastructure carries the signal that people trust, then that protecting that trust becomes part of the mission, even if it wasn't originally designed to be that way. And so, the responsibility abounds, whether it's in the policy sector or in the actual industry. None of us can absolve ourselves of a responsibility to take an action, especially as we see the industry change. And that's what we're watching today, whether you're looking at AI and synthetic threats, or whether you're looking at the different attack vectors that are happening today that were unheard of before, where we're combining the use of a telephone with the use of a computer, with the use of AI and a human to create a threat that we never thought possible. And so if you look at it in that context, you have the opportunity to take a leadership role. And that's where, when I say, regulation is going to happen no matter what, at some point, governments will become involved because it's their job to protect the people. But it
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily have the expertise that the industry itself has. And so, why not take the lead in how it should happen by starting the conversation, um, testing, going into a testing environment that says, no, we know this is happening. And we have partnered either internally or with the larger community who has different levels of expertise to come in and show them ways that they can stay ahead of the threat and the adversary. And not those two are not the same, because the adversary is the actual individual who is creating these new and novel approaches. But the other side of that is the people, the children, the older adults, and the employees and small businesses who don't have that large infrastructure that enables them to have a defense layer. Now, industry is taking that responsibility internally to say, we know we have a problem, and we know that we are going to take steps that enable not just the infrastructure, but the users that we've built the infrastructure for. Because the last thing that you want is for someone to pick up their phone. Oh, there we go. For someone to pick up their
Mhm.
phone and go, I'm 50% confident that I'm going to call somebody. I'm confident that my call is going to make it through. I'm
Mm.
confident I'm going to connect with the other individual. And that's where my confidence stops. That's the last thing we want in this industry that fuels us professionally and personally with person to person interaction. I hope I answered your
Mhm.
question.
Absolutely. And you made me think about also how in my early years in telecom working for Nortel, we used to build networks with 99.99, I think they called it the five nines, percent reliability. So that you wanted that call to get through and there's a lot of components again. That became a commodity pretty much. I guess now we're going to have to switch into now we want that metric that we used to have as a goal in terms of network performance. They also have to change and adapt into trustworthiness and how trustworthy the data traveling to my network is, because at the end of the day it protects the user and it protects society at large. So I mean, I can tell I could be talking to you for hours and hours on this subject. I'm very passionate about it. I think our audience hopefully has learned a lot. So if I was as a closing question to ask you, Terri, I'm sure you're so knowledgeable, but what would be one thing that you wanted listeners to take away, especially those that maybe think this doesn't apply to me, or why would it be even a concern about any of these? What would your thoughts go to?
Well, if someone can convincingly sound like the people you trust, then this applies to you. And if you're sitting listening to this podcast right now, every single person should go, oh my goodness, this applies to me. So, this isn't about paranoia. It is about designing systems that deserve the trust we place in them. Now, that may be an altruistic and idealistic way to look at things, but I don't know anyone today who can live without their phone. And
Hmm.
so
Yes.
it has become as much infrastructure as a part of day to day life, a part of who I am, and a part of how we manage our children in how they're growing up and how they're using technology. Trust doesn't vanish overnight. Trust erodes quietly unless it's deliberately protected. And that's really important because to tie it to the theme of the mobile century and what's happening in this stage, as connect AI and intelligent infrastructures
Hmm.
reshape global networks, um, telecoms have the opportunity to be at the forefront of change. And that's a huge risk and a huge responsibility. But you're going to build the systems anyway. And you're going to build the systems that they're not just going to move data faster, they're going to protect us, they're going to protect our confidence, and the ability to be authentic at scale is unexpected for the industry, um, gives you an opportunity to set the conditions, set the stage, and really write the regulation and policy that's going to come after, as opposed to trying to catch up. And so, for all the leaders in the room who are listening to the podcast and are thinking about, the themes of the conference and where we're headed and what we're looking at, I like to be a disruptor. And some people kind of raise their eyebrow and go, you're just going to create chaos. No, a disruptor doesn't create chaos. A disruptor sees the change that is coming and moves to interdict that change so that they can harness control over how it morphs in the system, and more importantly, to keep it from degrading the system that I have decided I am going to produce for the global commons and for the future. And so, that would be my message, because it's really at the forefront of that change where you can be the change, not after. After is about catching up. After is about meeting outcomes as opposed to setting conditions and mobilizing the industry to be better, to evolve. And oh, by the way, you might find something that you didn't think was possible today in your evolution in this space. You may find something that catapults infrastructure, that catapults performance, credibility, trust, authenticity in the system, all rolled up into one. And so I know that was long-winded, but as
Nice,
you can
was
tell, I'm a bit
amazing.
passionate about I'm about this particular topic, because I think that this is going to be the more technologically advanced we get, the more we have to return to some of the basic human things that keep us human, that force the connection.
No, that was as powerful as it gets. I couldn't have hoped for a better closing. It's coming from somebody from your stature. I mean, I'm humbled. Your experience, your expertise, and just how you presented for somebody to say, disrupting. I'm with you. I like disruption. I'm usually frustrated by people that see disruption as a bad thing. I think just how you laid it out, I think plan ahead. I think the industry has gotten a little bit complacent and just don't break it if it's not, no need for it, but we need to be more active. GTWN, it's about that. It's about action. We have a call to action every Mobile World Congress. And so this fits right into it. And I'm very happy that you said yes to and accepted my invitation to co-author such a great article. And just full disclosure here, I've written for the magazine for a few years now, but you really carried that article. I just kind of showed it in a few lines, but this is all your brilliance. So thank you. And thank you for being with me in this podcast. And to you all out there, just we hope we open your eyes in terms of trust is at the center of it all. And we'll see. And I hope to have you on another episode, hopefully in the new time soon. So thank you, Terri,
Absolutely.
so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much,
much.
Leticia.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. And until the next episode, take care.
I want to thank our guest for joining today's episode of GTWN Now, and give a big thank you to our sponsors, CMS Global, for making this episode possible. Today's podcast will be available on our website, gtwn.org, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified when new episodes drop. I'm your host, Rosalie Gitao, GTWN International Board Member, wishing you a week of wonder.